The channel smelled like wet iron and rope. Even before dawn, the ocean had a texture, chopped into tight fists by wind and tide, knuckles rising and falling under the LCVP's square bow. I stood with my rifle over my chest, helmet strap biting my jaw, trying not to count the seconds as the coxswain rode the swell. The ramp dripped and rattled. Somewhere behind me, a private was whispering a prayer with the same rhythm as the engine. We had rehearsed this crossing on calm, inland water. This was not rehearsal. 2 minutes, the coxswain yelled without turning. His voice was the voice of every dockside I had ever known, matter of fact, tired, incapable of drama. Keep your damn heads down. I was First Lieutenant Thomas Hale, platoon leader, Company F, 2nd Battalion, 116th Infantry, 29th Division. The order packet said our task was simple to read and complicated to do. Land on a strip of Normandy beach the Navy had labeled like a chessboard. Dog red was ours. Cross the tide flat and shingle. Cut lanes through obstacles and wire with the attached engineers. Breach the seawall, climb the bluff, and reduce the strong points that made the beach a killing ground. The map squares called them Widerstandsnester, resistance nests, with numbers. WN61, WN62, a cognitive trick to make concrete and guns into tidy entries. The sea didn't care about our packets. A wave lifted us like a child's toy and slapped us down again. I felt the dory life of the boat in my knees and the hollow weight of the pack on my shoulders. Radio batteries, Bangalore sections, a roll of engineer tape, my field glasses, my own fragments of confidence. I looked down the line of faces braced along the sides. Sergeant Pike, calm as a farmhand at threshing. PFC Ramirez, humming through chattering teeth. Dombrowski, the quiet runner who could sprint like a deer. And the engineers from the 146th, one cradling a Bangalore torpedo like a length of angry stovepipe. 1 minute. The gray ahead of us began to arrange itself. Shy daylight, a paler strip where surf should be, darker smudges that would be obstacles, hedgehogs and ramps, and beyond it, just a suggestion. The bluff, its crown toothed with something darker. I had stared at aerial photos for days. Now the photos stare back. Ramps, the coxswain called. On my mark. Go fast, go low. God help you if you stop in the door. The ramp banged down, and the world became noise. The first thing I heard was the sea shoving the boat. The second was bullets fretting the water, sewing white stitches ahead. The third, I did not know where it came from, was a sound like tearing canvas deeper than a sewing machine. An MG-42 somewhere on the bluff drawing lines in the air. The smell of cordite arrived with the wind. Move, I heard myself say in a voice I would later recognize as my father's, flat, intolerant of debate. 2 men went ahead of me and stepped into water up to their chests. I went next, hit the surf cold enough to peel skin, and stumbled toward the black steel of a hedgehog, using it as a shield because it was there. The plan had said tanks will lead. German obstacles and the tide had written a different plan. I could see a duplex drive, Sherman wallowing 10 yards to my right, its canvas screen torn, its crew climbing out slow and helpless as if from a dream. On the sand ahead, a line of men was already belly flat behind the shingle, faces turned to the bluff, helmets listing like shells. We were supposed to assemble at a painted sign our NCOs would plant in the sand. There was no sign. There was sand. F on me, I shouted, wading and then crawling, my pack dragging like a shackle. I reached the lip of the shingle with my lungs burning and found Sergeant Pike there, counting with 2 fingers and a knuckle. Who had made it, who had not, who had to be found. Engineers, I managed. Here, said a voice near my boots. The sergeant from the 146th had gotten his Bangalore sections ashore. He pushed one toward me like a gift. Tell me where you want the first lane. I peered over the shingle the way you peer over the edge of a roof when the alley below has teeth. The wire began 20 yards off, knee-high, then waist-high, then a chest of thorns. Beyond it the seawall, a low concrete lip, and beyond that, crocodile mouths of embrasures, rectangles of black where the bunkers watched us. A periscope winked, and the MG tore another sheet of daylight. Left of that hedgehog, I said. We use the obstacle for cover. We'll run it like a handsaw, pull plant back. He grinned in a way that looked like a grimace. I like men who talk like carpenters. We worked one Bangalore forward in a crawl, bodies pressed to sand, then another. Ramirez hot-wired the coupler with steady fingers. All while the noise went over us like weather, like a high wind that chooses which houses to ruin. A mortar round thumped somewhere to the right and dragged a sheet of sand over our heads. I tasted grit. My teeth felt like chalk. "Fire in the hole," the engineer said, and his voice, though not loud, cut through the beach like a clarinet. The explosion did not look like the movies. It was not a perfect sheet of flame. It was a violent decison made by wire and sand, a gap torn ragged, a way where none had been. "Lane 1, I heard myself say, and Pike repeated it. And then we were up, bent, running, each man understanding that what made this moment survivable was its speed. Beyond the lane, the seawall felt like a friend. We threw ourselves against it, breath ragged. Overhead, the sky had gotten full of the U.S. Navy. A destroyer showed itself past the western headland, bold and indecently close, one of the sailors' greyhounds. Her name I could not read, but later learned, turning broadside to us like a man turning shoulder into a punch. Her bow gun boomed. The shell went into the bluff like a hand in a bread, and for a time the MG-42's voice got thin and panicky. "Sir," Pike said. He had a shout into my ear. "You wanted a bunker. I got you a bunker." He stabbed a finger toward a cut in the seawall, where a masonry path stepped up into the dunes. Half hidden by brush, its embrasure at a high angle, a concrete battery, Regelbaugh of some number or other, squatted like a toad. It had a machine gun set in the side and a slit with a shield that looked to hold a 75 millimeters. The slit was fast shut now, but its voice had been ours to hear. "WN-62, I said, because naming things made them less infinite. "We'll go see the landlord." "Rangers had that job," Pike said. "Rangers are busy. We do it by their book." He nodded once. We had all read the same pamphlet before sailing. Seawall to bluff in 8 stages, with smoke, with engineers, with a little luck. The pamphlet had not described the smell. I called up the shore fire control team. A Navy ensign in a wet sweater crouched with a hand mic that was not the same as ours. A different grammar, different etiquette. "Destroyer fire control. This is Foxtrot leader on dog red," he said in a steady classroom voice. "Request 1 round. He bunkers WN-62 grid 87. Mark my smoke." I sent Dombrowski, the runner, with a message scribbled on a waterproof card. "Bangalore teams to the dune gap. Machine guns to enfilade the path. Smoke grenades ready." He went low and fast, a blonde streak in a private war with open ground. When he came back, his grin had lost a baby tooth I had never known he owned. The smile of a fox whose plan just worked. The first naval shell came in like a mailbox full of thunder. It struck the front slope of the bluff and shook wet sand from the seawall onto our helmets. "Over," the ensign said to his unseen gunnery crew, calmly as ordering eggs. "Walk it back 30. A second shell shaved brush from the crest and punched a brown breath out of the earth. "Now or never," I said. We moved. The dune path was like a throat. We went up it not in a line, but in little pieces, a fire team to cover, another to climb. Engineers rolled in the Bangalore sections like caterpillars, then we traded tasks. The covering team became climbers, the climbers became a wall. Smoke grenades made private weather. The German machine gun in the side pit chattered blind into the smoke until one of our bar men stroked a line at the muzzle flash and made it be still. At the top of the path, there was a tangle of trench, and beyond it the mouth of the bunker. A low rectangle of dark. The 75 shield was still closed like a sleepy eyelid. A periscope bobbed, then it was gone. "Satchel," Pike said, meaning the package of explosives that could argue with the door. Wait, I said, and in a tone I had not intended, I called in English into that dark. Rouse. Hands up. Head house. The only answer was a ringing, as if someone had thrown a small metal bowl on a concrete floor. Then silence big as a church. We placed the satchel. The engineer who had lugged it up looked small and tired and wholly professional. He wedged the charge against the seam of the shield and lit the fuse with a glance at his watch. 10 seconds, he said. Back. We were past counting. We held each other's belts like children and flattened behind the lip. The charge thumped, not large but corrective. Dust blew out through the periscope tube like breath on a winter morning. We went for the door. This was the moment every manual in the world turns into bullet points and black arrows. The door was heavy steel, inset in concrete, with a small, smug handle. The satchel had not moved it. Bangalore sections, I said, and then, no, charge is spent. I looked left and right, found a narrow entrance to the trench that served the bunker. Grenades, I thought, and then thought no, not yet. We were on the lip of something we did not understand. From inside the bunker came a sound like a cautious footstep. I had never been inside a German bunker. In training, they had built us Pine simulators and told us stories. The real thing was behind that door, and the men behind me looked at it the way you look at a submerged log you have put your foot on. Is it wood? Is it snake? Will it roll? Sir, Pike said, in a voice that respected all the minutes we had used to get here. Orders. I put my hand flat on the cold steel of the door. Through it, as if the concrete were a drum, I thought I could feel a vibration. Faint, not mechanical. Human? A radio? A breath? Give me your chalk, I said. He fished a stub from his pocket. I scrawled a crude white arrow on the door with the word Aufmischen. Open up, under it in my schoolboy German, and then a big X. That X means we try it once, I said. Then we changed the plan. We stacked. Ramirez on the left with a shotgun he had sworn was his grandmother's back in El Paso. Pike on the right with a grenade that had grown heavier by the footstep. I took the middle. On one, I said because saying 3 felt like a sermon. 1. I lifted the handle. It moved. We froze there like figures in a photograph, the door heavy and surprised in my hand, smelling of oil and seawater, opening the thickness of a boot's toe. Inside was darkness shaped like a small room. A lamp burned on a desk, yellow and domestic. A black telephone hung from a switchboard like a sleeping bat. A map lay open under a weight. A kettle sat on a hot plate and made a tired sound. And between the desk and the periscope shaft stood a man in a gray field blouse with a captain's bars I did not know the proper German for. His hands were empty. His eyes were not young, and they were not theatrical. There was a little gloss of sweat on his upper lip. He glanced at the kettle as if ashamed of it. He looked at me. He looked at the shotgun. He took one short step backward until his belt touched the desk and said in English that was better than my German, Please, nobody nuts. Hands, I said, my voice a language spoken by strangers. Up. He raised them. Good, he said, ironic as a schoolteacher. Let us all be sensible people. Behind him, in the half-light of the second chamber, I saw other shapes, men huddled, one with a bandaged arm, a radio operator whose headset sat crooked, a machine gunner with his fingers resting on his knees like a penitent. No one moved toward a weapon. The room had a smell that did not belong on a beach, sweat and wool and coffee, German coffee, which is to say a brave idea of coffee. The engineer in my back whispered, If there's a demolition switch. We all looked at the telephone board. The German captain followed our eyes and shook his head. They took the charges for St. Laurent Road yesterday, he said, almost conversational. We are not ending in fire today. You can come in. He said like welcome. He said like I am tired. I pushed the door wider. Pike, I said, and he began to move the men in, 2 to cover, 2 to bind hands with tape, 1 to sweep the second chamber where the ammunition should be stacked. In the doorway, I looked backward down the dune path and saw the beach below, the destroyer turning again to show us her big, unashamed flank to the shore, the neat, patient work of men on a tide of violence. For a moment, I could feel both worlds, outside where time was counted in seconds, inside where time had been counted in shifts. I stepped into the bunker. The captain lowered his hands an inch, an experiment in trust. The kettle ticked. Ramirez, whose grandmother would have approved, reached past the German, turned off the heat, and said, "You'll scorch it." The enemy commander blinked and almost smiled. "What's your name?" I asked. "Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Claus," he said. "Coastal Defense." "And you?" "Ale. Thomas," I said, because inside a room, rank is only half the truth. "You're our first house call of the day." He frowned at the idiom, then gave up. I had been expecting someone. I confess I had imagined rangers with more knives. "Knives are on back order," Pike said, and a ridiculous little relief moved through the room, a wind that was not respect and not hatred and not anything the pamphlets had defined. It was simply a pause in the relentless machine. Then the telephone on the board rang, short, insistent, alive like an insect in a glass. No one moved. The German captain looked at it the way a man looks at a dog that might bite. "That," he said, "is the battery commander inland, asking why the sea no longer answers him." "Don't," my engineer breathed, and I realized why my palm was sweating on the rifle stock. If that phone was a gun in a different language, if one word could call a pattern of shells onto the dune path, onto the beach lanes, onto the men, now moving up in small teams with their bandoliers and courage, then we were fools to stand here considering kettles. "Ramirez," I said, "rip the wires." He crossed the room in 3 steps, and with a quick practice motion I did not have to teach him because he had grown up around radios and kitchen appliances, tore the bundle from the back of the board. The bell gave one last dumb ding and died. The captain winced as if someone had broken a small bone in his hand. In the doorway, the air shifted. The smoke we had thrown was thinning. The wind, which had been our friend, turned its face. From below, the beach's music changed key. Pike's head cocked like a dog's. "Sir," he said, "hear that?" It was not the MG. It was a different percussion, one I had only heard twice before in training. The deeper, slower boom of naval guns finding a new target ashore, walking their rounds back and forth as a master spent time on a scale. The destroyers had a new conversation, and we were standing with a man whose map might help us translate it. Claus followed our listening, smiled in a way that was a baring of teeth, and pointed with his chin to a side shelf where a box of papers sat like a lunch pail. "Range tables," he said, "for the 75, for the 50, for the mortar on the right. If you take them, the men who replace me will need an hour they do not have." He said it like a confession and like a bargain. "Sir," a private from the second chamber, face flushed with the success of a task accomplished and the shock of a second task appearing, leaned in. "Back room's clear. There's a tunnel, but we caved it with a satchel. We've got, God, sir, phones, charts, 3 crates of ammo, and a first aid box if the medics want it." I looked at Claus. He looked back at me with a small, tired dignity. Behind him, one of his men shifted on the bench, a movement of pain contained by discipline. It occurred to me we were now responsible for these men's lives in a way we had not been a minute ago. This was the inside of invasion, where clear turned into care faster than the manual said. Down on the beach, a shell landed with a slowness that made the earth seem soft. The wind turned again. The phone on the wall stared at us with its dead eye. "Pike," I said, "we hold here until the second wave links up. Get the Navy on our coordinates. We have eyes on the right-hand mortar pit and can walk them in. Ramirez, tag these maps for S2 and pack them. Dombrowski, take a team down and mark our lane with engineer tape and an arrow. Foxtrot here. And grab the medics. We've got bandages to steal." Claus watched with detached curiosity, like a schoolteacher politely interested in new teaching methods. He inclined his head to me slightly and then, with that particular courtliness the Germans had taught at their academies, even when the roof was coming down, said, "Liutale, may I make a suggestion? The second chamber's air vents. If you block them, The bunker breathes hot and damp. Your men will not want to rest here long. And he pointed up toward the periscope. Do not let a curious private put his eye to that while your destroyer is bored. They have a talent for breaking the periscopes, and the Shard are cruel. I had the insane urge to thank him for house tips. Duly noted, I said, because my mouth had more dignity than my brain. Then, because it had to be asked, I asked it. Anything wired to blow? He spread his hands. As I told you, we sent our charges inland. It was thought the road would be a better grave than the sea. Today you get neither, I said. Today we get coffee that will grow cold, he said. And for a moment I saw in him not the enemy, but a father with a stubborn son who had insisted on a duty and run out of days. The destroyer boomed again. The bunker's air quivered. Someone out on the bluff shouted he had eyes on the right-hand pit. A Navy voice on the shore net said Roger in a syllable that weighed 1,000 pounds. A medic slipped past me with a waterproof bag and said, "Sir, mind if I raid their kit?" And I said, "Raid away." And then, just as the room began to feel like a strange office where men with mismatched paperwork had to agree on whose stamp mattered, a trembling went through the concrete that was not destroyer and not mortar. It felt like a train under the floor, like something heavy and deliberate and new. Pike and I looked at one another. "Tank," he said. "Not ours." I said because our tanks had not made friends with the surf. The German captain's eyebrows lifted. He tilted his head as if listening to a beloved piece of music from the next room. "Our friends?" he asked, and for the first time his voice had hope in it. "A self-propelled gun from inland? If so, Lieutenant, your destroyers will have a proper conversation." The floor hummed again, slow, the sound swelling then fading, like an animal testing the door with a shoulder. Dombrowski yelled from the path that men were coming up in good order, and their voices carried that under-tremble back into the room like a rumor. The kettle, neglected, ticked cool on the plate. I looked down at the dead phone, at the maps, at the men in the second chamber, at the door to the world where sand still made time. I had imagined the inside of a bunker as a tomb. It was a switchboard. "Pike," I said, keeping my voice steady because it needed to be a bridge for other men's feet. "Get the shore fire party to our lip. If that rumble is armor, we're calling for common and leaving the finesse to another day. Engineers, set a second charge on the gun shield. If they get the casemate door open, I want this slit a bad memory. Ramirez, post a man at the periscope, but do not put his eye on it. Have him listen to the sound coming up the shaft and tell me how fast that beast is walking." The German captain watched me with a certain melancholy professionalism, as an architect watches a remodeler who has brought in a good crew. He pointed once more, gently, to the shelf where the range tables lay bound with string. "You have taken my room," he said. "Now take my arithmetic." I put the string in my pocket. Outside, the destroyer rode a line of sound under the sky, and the bunker, new to us and already too small, became a place where the next decision waited with its palms open. Hashtag Part 2. The rumble in the floor came again, slow, heavy, like a truck testing a barn wall. It was the kind of sound that suggests geometry, mass plus intent. Ramirez had his ear to the periscope tube the way a doctor listens to a chest. He held up 2 fingers, interval, and then a thumb, close. "Engine note low," he said. "Not fast. Could be a self-propelled gun easing up the farm track. Or a towed piece bumping in low," Pike said. "Either way, if it sees the beach, we're back to arithmetic we don't like." I waved the surefire party forward. The Navy ensign crawled to the lip, phone to ear, face flecked with sand as if he'd been baking bread and never wiped his hands. "Destroyer fire control, Foxtrot spotter," he called evenly. "Shift from WN crest to inland track, right of church steeple. Request common, bracketing, adjust on my splash." Claus, bound but very much present, angled his head. "If it is a Stu G," he said, "its gun is low." He will show only a thin smile. He paused, corrected himself like a teacher. "Silhouette." "Appreciated," I said, and pushed the range tables toward the ensign. Use their math to save our skin. The first salvo from a Greyhound cracked the air. A second later, the track above coughed dust in two neat geysers, one short, one long. The ensign's pencil flicked, his voice a metronome. Drop 50. Fire for effect. The next salvo arrived like a decision. The floor shivered, and Ramirez flinched away from the periscope with a grin that had no humor in it. He's backing out, he said. I'd back out. Men were coming up the path in ones and twos, breathy with the work of it, eyes wider than any doctrine. A junior lieutenant from G Company slid in beside me and blinked at the concrete interior as if he'd found a museum on the moon. You running this place? He asked. For the moment, I said. We've got eyes, phones, and a roof that doesn't care about small arms. Get your squad to the right hedge. Bar set to rake that alternate path. Engineers are prepping a second charge on the slit in case they get clever. He nodded with a gratefulness I remembered from school. Someone telling you where the next classroom is when your schedule looks like a cipher. He took 2 steps, turned back. Sir, down below, they're stacking litters at the shingle. Bring the medics up here when they can, I said. We've got clean bandages and flat tables. Tell them. No grenades in the surgery dashed. He actually smiled. The destroyer walked her fire left. Each splash climbed the far bank of the draw and shook out dirt like a dusty rug. Through the periscope tube, the bunker breathed gun smoke. Thin, civilized, a smell that meant someone else's danger for once. Sir, Pike murmured, cocking his head to listen past the cannonade. German mortar pit right of the orchard just resumed. That empty space on our right's about to be full of unhelpfuls. I dragged the periscope head sideways without offering my eye to it, peered at the rim where the sound surfaced like a carp. Ensign, shift, right 40. Mortar, hedgerow gate, white farmhouse chimney for reference. He spoke it without embellishment. A moment later, the destroyer replied. Her shells sliced hedgerow like a barber in a hurry. The mortar thumped twice and then became a rumor. Claus watched us conduct this foreign liturgy the way an organist listens to a new hymn from the back pew. We used to say, he remarked, that our fortifications would pin you on the beach until your courage leaked into the sea. I see now we never quite studied your dogs. Greyhounds bite, Pike said, even when it's cold. In came the medics, 2 from our battalion and 1 Navy corpsman drawn by gravity toward the wounded wherever they were. They set up against the second chamber wall, commandeered a table, a lamp, and the German first aid box with the Red Cross painted in a shade of red no American quartermaster would have approved. A wounded German machine gunner sat on the bench, bandage soggy at the shoulder, eyes glassy and offended. A farm boy from Pennsylvania stood next to him with a canteen and a posture that made it clear he would not let anyone be cruel. English, the medic asked the German. Enough, the man said, and the medic said, good. Don't lie to me about how you feel. As if they'd been neighbors too long to accept theater. For 10 minutes, the bunker was hospital, switchboard, and gunfire observation post in equal measure. We layered functions the way carpenters layered joists until the room held. At 1100, a new sound carved itself into the air. Sharper, angrier, closer, the slapping crack of 20 millimeters from the east. A low aircraft flashed over the bluff, banking hard seaward. One of ours in distress, or one of theirs on defiance. The destroyer heeled, her captain choosing whether to respect sky or earth for the next 10 breaths. We flattened instinctively. The plane went screaming down the draw and away like rage, refusing a conversation. Air defense inland, Claus said, almost apologetic. We borrowed guns from everywhere. You should thank your pilots for not enjoying this beach. We thank them every hour, I said. We'd send them flowers if we could keep them alive long enough to smell them. By noon, the noise changed timbre again. The MGs on the crest had thinned. The beach below held not just lines of men fighting sand and fear, but squads stacking at the base of the path, waiting to be fed upward. Someone had found a bulldozer. God bless the ordnance boys. And it coughed like a consumptive dragon as it bit into the shingle for a vehicle exit. Naval guns slowed their scale practice and turned to new etudes where other companies fought. The bunker felt less like a bottle in a storm and more like an office with deadlines. Pike, status. Lane marked. Bangalore prep on the next strand if we need it. G and H linking in. Ammo low, but the beach is catching up to itself. We could push a patrol to the next nest and see how far the legs go. I looked at the German range tables we had co-opted. They were tidy little works of hate, columns of numbers that made death portable. I folded them into my map case and felt the weight change my center of gravity. All right, I said. We crown this place with a friendly sign and hand it off to the second. Then we move on that hedgerow line. Bring claws. The German captain raised an eyebrow when we cut him free enough to walk under guard. A tour, he asked lightly. A consult, I said. You know the distances. You'll save me 30 guesses I can't afford to be wrong. He nodded once. A gentleman's bargain. We stepped out into a world that had length again. The smoke was ragged now, the wind stealing it from itself. On the left, a squad from the 5th Rangers came over the lip in a fluid, practiced wave, faces all business like dock workers when the anchor chain starts to sing. One of them saw our captured bunker and slapped the wall with the casual proprietorship of a man greeting a bar he's brawled in before. Foxtrot here. Dombrowski had chalked with engineer tape under it like a streamer. Beside it, he'd drawn a crooked arrow pointing inland and a smiley face I would make him scrub off later. Your men are cheerful, Claus observed. They're alive, Pike said. It's a very specific kind of humor. At the hedgerow's first gap, he paused, cocked an ear, then made a quick finger circle. Our point man slid through, crouched behind an apple trunk, and peered. I took a knee and raised my field glasses. It was a farmyard, stone house, slate roof, barn with a shadow deeper than it ought to be, a water pump shining stupidly in the sun because it did not understand war. No movement, which was the loudest sign of all. Claus leaned slightly. If I were the mortar you killed, my ammunition carriers would have tucked their crates in that barn and gone aground in the orchard. There, he pointed with his chin, is a track that won't take a tank but will take a small gun on wheels. And there, a last nod, is where my sergeant would put a rifle to shoot your first curious man. Thank you, I said. Pike, 2 grenades over the fence to the barn, toss and talk. Then bar on the hedge, slow sweep. Ramirez, shotgun on the door if anyone volunteers body and ignorance. We did it as if we had practiced it, because we had on maps and in towns that had never seen an army. The grenades went with a soft whomp that tidied straw and courage, a scrabble of boots, a shout in German, and a man came out with hands high and dust in his hair. Ramirez did not shoot him, even though the moment made his trigger finger itch like a mosquito bite. 2 more men followed, one limping, and behind them a boy who could not decide if he wanted to shout or cry. The orchard gave us a different problem. A burst of rifle fire from a shape that was more tree than man, high and useless, and then a silence full of trying not to breathe. Claus watched my face as if he could see the algebra moving. Your man is afraid, he said. Let him be afraid for a minute more. Then you'll find him behind the second row. He will be sick, and he will be 15. If you kill him now, you will get only death. If you do not, you will get a prisoner and a clearer conscience than war generally allows. You're very calm about the fate of your army, Pike said. Claus shrugged with one shoulder. I'm calm about the fate of boys. We waited the minute. The boy came out, cheeks tracked with grime and shame, rifle held as if it were a stick someone had given him as a joke. Pike took it with a care that surprised me. He patted the boy's arm once, businesslike, and sent him to the medic with the authority of a foreman. By early afternoon, the bluff was a chain of captured, smashed, or abandoned concrete mouths. The beach below crawled with organization. Tractors pulling obstacles, bulldozers biting exits, MPs with flags creating roads where the morning had tried to make a graveyard. From our bunker, I could see supply traces beginning. Ammunition dumps marked with engineer tape, water points, a signal tent sprouting lines like ivy. The beach had decided to be a port. We handed WN-62 to a fresh captain with a clipboard and horror in his eyes he was trying to hide. Charts on the desk. I told him. Periscope shards are cruel. Keep your boys' faces away. Don't answer the phone, even if it seems polite. The destroyer will listen if you talk like a grown-up. Thank you, he said. You painted Foxtrot here dash. My runner has a sense of humor, I said. Erase the smiley. Claus watched the exchange with anthropological interest. A jeep growled past propelled by human hands. The engine drowned. Two engineers pushing, one steering, the whole arrangement like a joke in a horror magazine. For the record, Claus said as we moved to the next hedgerow, you took this position efficiently. I would have preferred to leave you here, but you are insistently portable. Portable is the only thing that gets off a beach, I said. Mid-afternoon brought the counterpoint every pamphlet promised. The inland road we were told to seize spat a proper column. The kind of thing that makes an infantry officer's stomach fall through the soles of his boots. Not tanks, but guns on wheels, half-tracks with canvas flaps, open to show faces, a car at the front with an officer's cap stuck out like a sail catching news. They were not charging. They were moving with purpose, like a man going to tell his neighbor a story that will change supper. I handed the range tables back to the ensign and said, "You may conduct your symphony." He did. I will be grateful to him as long as I have days. He had a voice like a yard foreman and patience like a good teacher. Left 3, add 50, up a touch. Hold, fire for effect, he said, not shouting, not thrilling, just turning math into mercy. The destroyer replied, with a professionalism that made emotion superfluous. The road took 4 hits in a chevron. When the smoke blew thin, the column had decided it had errands elsewhere. Look there, Claus murmured, and I followed his gaze. 2 men in German field gray were dragging a wounded comrade behind the stone culvert. One stumbled, fell, and got up again with the awkward dignity of someone carrying weight he did not choose. War is not kind to anyone, but kindness sneaks in where it can hide. At 1,600, we broke into the last tooth of the ridge that dominated our sector, a low, mean rectangle that looked smug from the seaward side and sensible from inland. Our engineers were down 2 torpedoes and 7 miracles. Ramirez had run out of clean words and was inventing new saints. Pike, who never raised his voice past useful, looked like a man who had put in a full week and was deciding whether to ask for Saturday off. The last fight for the last bunker was not dramatic. That is the kindness of honest work repeated. Nothing left to surprise you except survival. We used smoke because the wind was for us, explosives because the door was stubborn, patience because men are not nails. A German corporal with the bone-white face of someone whose body had used its last coin surrendered with a polite half-bow I would think about later in a church. Inside, the bunker looked like the first, maps, cups, wires, the smell of men. On the wall, in pencil neat enough to be a prayer, someone had written, "Halt durch, hold out." On the desk, someone else had left a pressed wildflower under a glass. Claus saw me see it and said nothing because whatever remark he might have had already been taken by the day. By 1700, the bluff was ours in the way a hard garden is yours after a day that leaves dirt in places you didn't know you had. The beach was a port. The road inland had opinions, but no veto. The destroyer stole away down coast to bully someone else's geometry. The medics took our last prisoner to the collection point and accepted 2 of ours in trade, with paperwork no one will ever read again. We marched the Germans we had gathered, Claus among them, to the temporary cage the MPs had scratched out near the farm lane. He stood with the casual erectness of a man used to lines. I walked him to the wire. "You managed the room well," he said, a remark that would be insufferable in any other context. "You built it well," I said. "It just turned out to be multi-purpose." He thought about that, then nodded. "We imagine fortresses as endpoints," he said. "They are, it seems, merely rooms other men will use. He hesitated, then added, in a tone that was half formality and half something like gratitude, I have a son. He is 16. If he lives, I want him to find work that is not measured in meters and shells. He looked up the road to where his army was arranging itself for tomorrow's fight. Today, I learned the difference between courage and stubbornness. I'll write the same sentence in my notebook, I said. Underline it twice. For my kids who aren't born yet. He offered his hand with the stiffness of a man testing a truce that cannot be signed, and I shook it with the frankness of someone too tired to pretend he will not remember. An MP coughed. Claus lifted his chin and walked into the wire. Evening slid down the bluff like a warm blanket. The sea finally smelled like salt instead of iron. On the beach, someone had flagged a landing zone for stretchers with a red panel that made the sand look briefly like a parade. The engineers kept their bulldozer idling, companionable as a farm animal too tired to be temperamental. The Shorefire party broke down their set with the same care you use to put away something fragile your grandmother gave you. I went back into WN62-1 last time. The room looked smaller without crisis in it. The kettle sat cold. On the desk, the range tables we hadn't taken yet waited politely for someone to decide their fate. I put them into my case and left a message scrawled on the map in grease pencil for the S2 team that would relieve us. Room wired for phone, but dead. Periscope glass broken. Don't lean. Vent blocks make heat. Use as warmth or punishment as needed. Coffee's bad but honest. Signed, Foxtrot. Ramirez stood a moment by the door, hat in hand, as if it were Sunday. Sir, he said, if anyone had told me at 4 in the morning I'd end the day running a German office with a Navy clerk and a first aid station, I'd have bet them all my cigarettes. You'd have lost, I said, but I'd have admired your confidence. We stepped outside to the last light. At the command post, a ditch with intentions. Major Klein, our battalion XO, squatted over a map lit by a shaded flashlight. He looked up, saw our faces, and let himself indulge in a grin. Hail, he said. Your switchboard up there, good work. Naval Liaison says you boys talk like gentlemen. Corps wants lanes widened at 1 and E3 overnight. You're on supervision. I said yes before asking if you're tired. I'm tired, I said, but I'll take polite compliments in trade. You get 2, he said, and a hot coffee the cooks are conjuring. Don't ask how. He pointed at our wristwatches with his chin. Dawn comes at a known time tomorrow. The enemy too. Get your people to ground. Get your machine guns on the hedgerow, like their fence posts your grandfather set, with a level. It was the best kind of order, specific and generous. We obeyed without argument, because it made the next minute simple. Night on the ridge was not silence, but a different composition. Flares climbed like slow moths and drifted down on parachutes that turned men into shadow puppets. Occasional bursts of fire stitched decisions into the dark. Somewhere down the draw a mule brayed, as if the day had told it a terrible joke. The sea breathed in polite conversation with the sand. I lay with my back against a friendly portion of earth and wrote on the waterproof card I carried as a talisman. Notes from WN62. 1. Concrete is a bad home and a good office. 2. A destroyer that trusts your voice is a friend for life. 3. If you steal a man's range tables, you inherit his arithmetic and his weather. For if the kettle is on, someone meant to come back. Pike appeared out of the dark and sat without ceremony. He handed me a mug that was technically coffee and legally courage. We made it, he said, not triumph, just inventory. We made it to tonight, I said. Tomorrow wants its share. He nodded. Always does. After a time, he said, You going to write that German's name in the report? Claus, I said. Yes. I paused. I might also write that he advised me not to put my eye on the periscope when a destroyer's board. That's a wisdom I'll pass to several grandchildren. Pike snorted quietly. Make sure you live long enough to be insufferable about it. That's the plan, I said. Dawn slid in sideways. Fog reached up from the folds inland like a cat's paw. We were on our feet before the light was honest. The beach below was already a machine, trucks grinding, cranes improvising, sailors in white hats amid army khaki like punctuation. A chaplain stood near the shingle reading from a little book to a group of men who bowed their heads because the morning had asked for quiet. We walked the line we had built, touching machine guns, counting men, peering down lanes with the proprietary pride of carpenters whose frame holds square. Here and there a face had not made the night. The medics had come quietly and gone. We nodded to the empty spaces in a way that counted them without letting them take the day. At 0700, the first enemy shells of the new day wandered in from someplace we did not yet own. They fell short, then short again. Then one walked into the hedgerow where we were not. Claus's range tables had taught us where not to be as much as where to look. I sent a patrol to deal with the etiquette of that gun, and the destroyer curled back like a wolf with time to spare. By 1,000, the regiment was speaking in paragraphs that contained roads and villages instead of just sand and fear. The beach had a scoreboard someone would brief a general on. Our bunker was no longer special. It was simply station WN62 in a network that grew by the hour. Radios, flags, runners, and the work of men who could lift their arms one more time. At noon, a jeep came up the lane with an S2 captain in it, spectacles fogged hair awry. He took the range tables with something like reverence and the kettle with something like amusement. "We'll tag this with a chalk number," he said. "You'll be in the after-action write-up." "Spell Ramirez correctly," Pike said. "In Bangalore." "I always do," the captain said gravely, and drove away. We walked once more to the wire cage. The Germans watched us with the stoicism of men whose day is no longer theirs. Claus stepped forward when he saw us and raised his hand in a little gesture that was neither salute nor wave. "You will go on," he said, not bitter. "We will," I said. "So will you." He nodded. "Yes, to tents, to forms, to ships, to sons who will ask questions. Tell yours the truth you can carry," I said, "and let the rest sleep." He considered that, then smiled a thin smile that had nothing to do with victory or defeat. I will tell him his father learned to respect men who can turn a house into a tool shed. And I'll tell mine his father learned to respect men who don't blow kettles, I said. We shook hands a second time, now fully wrong and fully right. In the late afternoon of June 7th, a day and a half after the ramp dropped and the water stitched white, I stood again in the doorway of WN62. The room had been cleaned to regulation. Somebody had hung a sign in English over the desk. It's to collection point dash. The kettle was gone, the phone line wrapped around nail, the periscope tube taped like a wounded finger. A new lieutenant I didn't recognize was using the concrete as a blackboard to write lane numbers for the engineers. He looked harried, happy alive. I stepped back into the light. The sea was blue in a way I had not allowed myself to notice. The wind smelled like a country and not a crime. Down the draw, a line of trucks waited their turn with the patience of machines that believe in schedule. A chaplain wrote names on a slate. A cook in a filthy white apron stirred a pot with the gravity of a doctor. A sailor waved at an army private like neighbors across a fence they didn't know they shared. Sergeant Pike stopped beside me and leaned on the wall as if it were a fence post he had set himself. "Those destroyer lads came by with a tin of peaches," he said. "They said we talked nice on the radio. Said it made their gunnery officer think of good schools." "Peaches," I said, and felt the word in my mouth like a sacrament. "Make sure the medics get the first spoonful. They earn dessert." He nodded, then after a quiet minute added, "Sir, what do we call this?" I looked down at the beach, up at the ridge, back at the bunker that was a room and a history and a very serviceable desk. I thought of the sentence I had written by weak flashlight. Concrete is a bad home and a good office. "We call it beginning," I said, "and we spell it with work." He took that like a carpenter takes a plan, not as poetry, but as a list. We walked down toward the lanes we had chalked and widened and handed him in with trucks and maps. Behind us, the bunker that had tried to kill us wore our sign, our tape, our fingerprints, and the echo of a kettle that had gone cold without malice. I did not look back again. The day had more rooms ahead.